My name is Sarah Wellington. I'm the drama teacher here in the high school, and it has been my great pleasure to be Elizabeth Somoza's personal advisor since she arrived so young, so naive in 9th grade. And we've had quite a journey together. Elizabeth has many, many interests, and if you know Elizabeth, she's enthusiastic about all of them. And one of them is acting, and that meant she, of course, played the lead role in the 9th grade drama club production because she was super enthusiastic about it and put in time and effort and love. And a key word, empathy. Elizabeth is full of empathy and enthusiasm, as I've mentioned, and intense curiosity. So when she started on her journey, around this time last year of what she was going to do, she was pretty sure she wanted to do the evolution of the hero from ancient myth all the way to the present day iteration in comic books. And this was super interesting, and I knew that, being with Elizabeth on this journey, I would learn a lot. And then it kind of, as she went down a rabbit hole of research and went burrowing around, and then she kind of popped her head back up, and she saw the social justice movements in the summer and became very interested in how social justice and LGBTQ characters and people were represented in modern comic books and what that effect was. She then went back down the rabbit hole and started, rootling around. And she was always able to come back up and sort of see where she was at and where she wanted to go with that. And this continued right throughout the year. We would have really wonderful conversations, going for a walk at the park or having a coffee or just really great kind of exploratory get-togethers where she brought all this material and we could discuss it. And then she hit the senior project writing block, and she teamed up with Miss Huckabee, and all of a sudden, Loki stepped to center stage. Please welcome Elizabeth Somoza.
Ooh, hello. Thank you, Ms. Wellington. So for those of you who may know me, you might be aware of two facts about me. One, I really like superheroes, and I'm very fascinated by superhero stories. And two, I tend to overthink and overanalyze absolutely everything, even if I don't really need to. So I thought for my senior project, why not combine the two things? And like Ms. Wellington said, I thought I could do something on maybe what the evolution of heroes says about humanity or social justice issues as they appear in comic books. And all the while, I'm struggling to focus these very broad, vague ideas. And I have a personal fangirl obsession growing with this lovely being on the side. And for those of you who don't know who this is the actor Tom Hiddleston as the character of Loki from the Marvel universe. And some basic facts about Marvel's Loki. They are an alien prince, sometimes princess, from the land of Asgard, which is the land of the gods. Loki is the god/goddess of mischief, lies, chaos, and evil. They are adopted by Odin, the Allfather, or king of the gods, which makes Loki the younger sibling to the much more well-known Thor, god of thunder, the hero of the story. Now, Loki's biological family happens to be the Jotun or frost giants, enemies of Asgard, and they're considered evil monsters, despicable creatures. So, as you can imagine, this creates an interesting dynamic between Loki and their biological family, and their adoptive family of Asgard. Now, these ideas and names may be slightly familiar to you because of the Norse mythology, especially if you were here in 4th grade. Marvel's Loki, is based off of the Norse trickster god of the same name, and while I don't have the time to share the wonderful, lovely mythological stories that exist, I did want to remind you all of one such story that made me ask a couple of questions, and that's the punishment of Loki. Like I said, I don't have the time to share specific details or background, but just know that the basics of this punishment are that Loki is being bound by the intestines of one of his own sons. And he's tied to this rock that is positioned under a snake that is dripping venom onto his body. And this is to be his torture until Ragnarok, or the end of the world. And I couldn't help but wonder, is this punishment fair? Does the punishment fit the crime? I mean, the crime that's being punished is murder, but does that warrant being tortured for eternity? And in order to consider this question, I had to consider, what is the purpose of punishment? Is it to correct someone's behavior, make them see the errors of their ways, or is it for those who create the punishment to get some sort of sense of revenge or self-satisfaction? And if those who create punishment are considered good, they're heroes, and those who suffer punishment are considered evil and villains, then what creates those boundaries? What makes someone good in our eyes? What makes someone evil? And most importantly, does goodness always justify the punishment? Now, in order to answer these questions, I'm going to take you through a few comic book stories that are a bit complicated and hard to follow. If I happen to lose you, please do not panic. I will be chiming in with thematic concepts that I want you to understand, and hopefully by the end, it'll all feel less overwhelming. So we're going to start with the 1998 run of Thor. Now, a run, for those of you who don't know, is just the term used for a comic book series, and each comic book within a series is called an issue. So the last 6 issues of the 1998 run take place during Ragnarok, and it's incited by Loki, who has raised an army to conquer all of Asgard. Now, through a separate sequence of events, Thor has undergone this journey to gain wisdom. And in his wisdom, he's discovered that Ragnarok is not a single day, a single moment that's happening now, but rather a cycle of death and rebirth that has been happening for years. And it's a cycle that must end, because it means that those who are alive, their only purpose in life is to die at Ragnarok, which diminishes the value and meaning of their life. And it takes away the honor in their death, because their death isn't permanent. They're brought back to life just to do it all again. So what does Thor, in his newfound wisdom, decide he must do to end this cycle? Well, he decides that he's going to kill everyone. And if you're going, hold on, wait a minute, heroes don't kill people, congratulations, you and Loki happen to be on the same page. Loki's the only one who considers Thor mad for these actions. Now, Loki doesn't know the context behind this decision, but granted, neither do many of Thor's peers. And the narrative sort of presents this as Thor is the hero, he must know what he's doing, and anyone who questions this must be the villain, right? So we just have to trust Thor, right? Well, there is something that makes me question whether someone's role as a hero always determines their trustworthiness, and that happens during this next scene, where Thor acknowledges that in his path to wisdom, he has seen Loki's backstory, and he understands the pain and suffering that is driving Loki's actions, and he decides that it matters not. What happens next is all that matters. What happens next, you may ask? Well, Thor decides that they're all going to die anyway, and Loki doesn't deserve an equal death. He deserves something greater. So Thor decides to rip Loki's head off of his own body, and he keeps it alive using magic, and he makes Loki watch as he brings an end to all the things that they both care about. Yikes. So everyone dies, and they do get brought back to life once more in the 2007 run, And this time is special because there's no Ragnarok. They're not confined to a single destiny. They can do what they want with their lives, be who they want to be. And no one takes advantage of this fresh start more than Loki, who comes back as who we now refer to as Lady Loki. Now, I mentioned that Loki is gender fluid. They're the prince and princess of Asgard. However, this aspect of their gender identity has not been introduced here as something to celebrate, but rather as something to highlight their villainy. See, the choice to appear as a woman here was made to get Loki to make him seem more trustworthy. See, he recognizes that they're all supposed to be getting their fresh starts, but people have their own preconceptions of who he is and who he's supposed to be, and it just so happens that at this moment, they're right. Loki's appearance is nothing more than a con. He hasn't changed at all. And if you think about it, this reflects a lot of fears that people have about the transgender community. This idea that people must be putting on false appearances to lure innocent people in unfairly. And this story, whether intentionally or not, perpetuates this idea. It justifies it because the characters in this story are correct in their belief. And while the story perpetuates this mindset, it simultaneously does the opposite, and it makes Loki a bit more relatable to certain people in the audience. I'll explain how that's done. So there's a moment in the comic when Loki uses time travel to go back into his past and make sure that he's always adopted, despite, in his mind, his adoption making nothing more than a life of trauma and neglectment. So why would you use something like time travel to make sure that your trauma always happens? Well, in Loki's words, I cannot go back and change what has happened, but I can make what happened happen. In other words, I can take control of a circumstance that makes me feel powerless. It's not being done to me, I'm being done to it. And we see this desire for control again before Loki returns to his present time when he stumbles across the dying body of his biological father, Laufey, who we see earlier in the comic has abused Loki as a young boy. So Loki here decides he's going to finish the job, and as he does it, he says, "You will never strike me again." This is not an action driven by malice in the same way that Thor's decision to rip Loki's head off his body was. This is an action driven by fear and the need to feel safe again. And what hits the final nail on this coffin for me is when Loki returns to present time, he's delivering this monologue as he gets back into his female appearance, but he delivers this line as a woman that carries specific weight. Loki says, "After I am done, suffice it to say my brother will not be in a position to threaten me or anyone else ever again." And this feeling, I think, is something a lot of women and a lot of oppressed groups actually can relate to. See, this line wouldn't have carried the same weight if it were said by a man or by a hero, because neither party is oppressed. And heroes particularly, we're used to seeing them fight to get what they want, sure, but they usually win. Our stories place them in a position of power. Good conquers evil. So if you're going to give a character a trait of an oppressed group, you're more effectively going to do it by giving it to the villain. And like I said, while this makes a character seem more relatable, it also is used quite frequently to highlight their villainy. And I'll get to what conflicting message this actually sends a bit later, because it does play a big role in the next comic book story, which is Agent of Asgard. And in Agent of Asgard, the Loki that I've been showing to you all dies and is replaced by a youthful reincarnation, free to choose his own fate. And this new young Loki decides that with this new fresh start, he's going to make a deal with the All-Mother, which is this ruling group of 3 goddesses on Asgard. And the deal is, for every 1 mission that he does for them, they will erase a crime done by his former self. That way, Loki can just focus on being Loki, being himself, with no other strings attached. And it starts out pretty well, mostly because everyone around him considers this not the Loki who wronged them. If the old Loki had wanted to change, that simply wouldn't be possible. It just wouldn't be trustworthy. But, speaking of the old Loki, there's a moment within the comics when Loki discovers that in one of the cells of the dungeons of Asgard is another version of him. Now, this is King Loki. He has conquered Midgard, or Earth, and has burned it to the ground simply because he can. And it turns out that the All-Mother has been getting advice from him. Now, why would the All-Mother, ruler of Asgard, get advice from him? Well, it turns out that King Loki is our Loki's future self. And King Loki's motive is to get our Loki to become him as soon as possible. So while the All-Mother has been helping our Loki become a hero, she's going behind his back and ensuring that he stays the villain. And obviously, our Loki is not very pleased by this. He says, "How could you do this to me, to us? We fought so hard and so long to break free from the chains of our destiny. Why would you form new ones?" And the response is, "Only you saw chains, Loki. For the rest of Asgard, knowing the end of the story brought security. We were at peace with fate. We call that a miracle." It's a miracle at Loki's expense because it confines him to a role he's trying to escape from, to grow from, a role he never even asked for in the first place, simply because it's what's familiar. It's the status quo. And heroes have never really been affected by the status quo because, like I said, they're in a position of power, and that's what allows the All-Mother to feel at peace with this decision. And we don't think much of it because our stories are told in the perspective of heroes, usually, but now we start to see things through a different light. Now, Loki decides that he's going to continue to do his best to achieve his goal, to be who he wants to be and not what anyone else tells him to be. He even makes a friend. Her name is Verity Willis, and she is important because she fights for him, and she's his support group. And that plays a big role in the Axis crossover. So Axis within the comics is this spell that turns good into evil and vice versa, so heroes and villains switch places. And this makes Loki get what he's wanted this whole time. He gets to be a hero, and that's great, right? Like, story over, we're done here. Except that we notice that he's given traits that say we associate with Thor, like arrogance, pride, macho, whatever. And it doesn't quite look as good with Loki. He starts to act like a condescending jerk. He pushes away his only friend, really, Verity, because he views his responsibilities as a hero as more important than the distraction of friendship. He even says something really interesting here. He says, "I was the god of evil, Verity. I've committed crimes that I thought could never be forgiven, but now I am changed. I'm absolved, and I feel no guilt." I think we can all agree that guilt is not the greatest thing to feel, and I'm not saying we should live in it, but if there's one good thing that guilt does is it provides a sense of the bigger picture. When you understand what you've done wrong, you know the importance of choosing to do what's right. And without it, Loki has no motivation to choose to do what's right. He feels entitled in his role as a hero, and thus feels justified that whatever action he does to punish those who deserve it must be fair. It must be good because he's good. He's the hero. He can even lift Thor's hammer. And for those of you who don't know the significance of this, Thor's hammer is unliftable unless you are considered worthy. And you're only considered worthy if you're not just a hero, but if you're the most heroic of the heroes. So Loki's never gotten close to lifting the hammer. And unfortunately, he still can't, because the spell gets reversed and Thor becomes the hero once more, and Loki becomes something in the middle. Except in the eyes of those around him, he'll never really be good enough to be a hero. He's too tainted. Even Thor says, once he was told that Loki could lift the hammer, "Certainly it is another lie, from the prince of all liars, and in poor taste at that. You must learn, Loki. There are some stories none will ever believe." Pretty harsh coming from your own brother, right? And Thor agrees. He comes to apologize, and he finds that Loki is incapable of lying. And Loki has something he needs to confess. See, remember how I told you that the old Loki had died, and this is a reincarnation? Well, the old Loki did die, and there was a reincarnation, but the ghost of the old Loki killed the reincarnation. So the Loki that we've been following and rooting for and supporting and seeing his growth is actually the old one, who was so tormented by the guilt of his murder that he wanted to be worthy of this fresh start. He wanted to change. And when Thor finds this out, he doesn't see the progress. He doesn't see the hard work. He just sees a murderer, and he's not happy. And he drags Loki to Asgard, beats him up in front of a crowd, and the crowd shuns Loki. And then Loki's exiled. And the only person who understands what he could possibly be feeling right now is King Loki. And this is when we get to hear what made King Loki so evil. See, they both started the same way. They were both agents of Asgard, changing the world and themselves, one mission at a time. And King Loki does it. He succeeds. He does all of his missions, he erases all of his crimes, and he can just be himself. He can be the hero. Except he finds that everyone around him, like I said, they consider him too tainted. He's not the god of evil anymore, but in their eyes, he's still the god of lies. And Loki puts up with this for 10 years before he just snaps. And he decides, if this is all I'll ever be considered, I might as well choose to make the most of this role. And he sends our Loki to the void and makes him consider the same options. Our Loki must either embrace nostalgia, enjoy the security of doing what's expected. Now, in other words, be the villain, or cease to be, die. And before Loki can make this decision, Verity calls him. Shout out to Loki's Daft Punk ringtone. And Verity calls to say that it's not too late. He can't be the god of lies forever because he already isn't. He can't tell a lie. That's what got him into this whole mess in the first place. Besides, she asks, what does being the god of lies even mean? And Loki considers this for a moment before realizing a lie is a story told, that's all. And we can all rewrite our stories. Write our own happy endings, our own redefinitions. We don't have to be what we're told to be, even by ourselves. So that's what he decides to do. He decides to rewrite the story. And how does he do that? Well, he dies. Are you sensing some kind of pattern here? And then he comes back to life again as the god/goddess of stories. And with this new title, we have to consider the magic that stories hold. See, stories have endless possibilities. They can build new worlds. They can take us to new places, make us feel things outside of our current state of being. They can connect us with people we might not encounter in our day-to-day lives. But all of that endless possibility is erased when a story is told through a hero versus villain narrative, because it confines all of that possibility and dynamicism into a box. And people are forced to fit the role of either hero or villain. And this idea, especially in what I said about connection, comes into big play here at the end of the story. See, where we would usually get some kind of big fight, some good versus evil, where good finally conquers and saves the day, instead, we get a conversation. And in this conversation, the mask, so to speak, comes off, and our Loki sees himself in the other. In other words, empathy is established. And with empathy comes the acknowledgement that every single person carries the same potential to do what's right and to do what's wrong. No one person is morally superior than another. And with that realization comes the ability to not just jump straight into punishment, but to understand what's really going on here, to see the person as they truly are and not just as defined by their actions, which I think is what we're all seeking. We all just want to be seen and understood as who we really are. That's not to say that King Loki doesn't get punished, because he does get imprisoned. Empathy and forgiveness does not mean you condone someone's actions, but it does mean that you recognize that each person has the ability to change. We're not just stuck to a single action or single moment in time. As Loki puts it, I can't be this Loki forever. You can't be that Verity forever. 5 years, 10 years, we'll both be different people. There's still gravity, what people expect, but birds feel gravity too, and acrobats and dancers, and they dive and swoop and tumble anyway. Okay, so if you're going, cool, what's the point of all of this time travel and Loki dying and all this nonsense? Well, I want to discuss, after the siren happens, I want to discuss the relevance of Agent of Asgard as it pertains to two groups of people specifically. And the first group is the LGBTQ+ community. I mentioned that Loki is gender fluid, but they are also bisexual. And this is important to see in a protagonist because, as I mentioned earlier, traits of the LGBTQ+ community are typically given to villains as a form of shorthand communication to the audience that this person is immoral and they cannot be trusted. This is what's known as queer coding, and if you don't really know what I'm talking about, you've seen it if you've ever seen a Disney movie, in that, for example, Ursula is given traits of a drag queen, and Hades is given traits as a stereotypical gay man. And this is particularly harmful to see in our children's media because it means that if you relate to these traits, you only get to see yourself in the character that dies or gets defeated in the end. Therefore, you don't deserve a hero's ending either. And on the flip side, if you don't relate to these traits, you still see that these people, well, they die or they get defeated in the end. So if you see a real life person who happens to resemble something like this, well, they must deserve that too, right? And with Agent of Asgard, a story that started in 2014, but whose final issue came out a month and a half after same-sex marriage was legalized, and we get a story in which a protagonist who happens to be a part of this community is fighting for their right to be themselves, and they succeed at the same time that an entire community in real life is doing the same. Well, we begin to see that even though there are hardships and discrimination afterwards, that the narrative is beginning to change. Now, the second group of people I want to discuss are people of color, especially in how we're treated by the criminal justice system. Now, our criminal justice system is what's known as a retributive form of justice. In other words, good guys win, bad guys get punished. And it's a good idea in theory. I mean, you would think it keeps everyone safe, right? Because the bad guys get punished. Except it allows for a lot of racism in the way that people of color have higher arrest rates, they are given more life sentences, and they have higher execution rates. And this is because we see this idea of moral superiority play out in our real lives. People in power tend to justify their harsh and often unfair actions by saying that this other separate group, well, they're criminals and they're evil and that's all they see. So they convince themselves and others that all of this must be justified, and at the same time they're telling this community, this is all you'll ever be, so you might as well stop trying. So in terms of criminal justice, what could be a possible alternative? Because we hear about this a lot, the unfairness of our criminal justice system, but what might we be able to do differently? I stumbled across a form of justice that's being introduced more widely in America called restorative justice, and it seeks to establish empathy first and foremost. It allows the victim and offender to not only engage with each other if they choose to, but to share their sides of the story with a judge or a sentencing counsel. That way, whoever's sentencing the crime doesn't just have to punish the crime, but they can address all of the contributing factors. That way, the goal is to make sure that the crime isn't committed again and that both parties can reintegrate into society as the people that they choose to be and not as defined by their actions or circumstance. Okay, so if you're asking me, I'm really overwhelmed. What could I possibly learn from all of this? Well, I want you to recognize that us human beings, we really love to label and categorize things, and that's fine. But if we allow ourselves to be restrained by our labels and we confine others to labels and categories as well, then we take away what makes us all dynamic and interesting. I had the privilege of speaking with Laura McGrew, who's a Jungian analyst, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said, those who are wounded are the agents of healing. In other words, you can't properly bring about change unless you know all sides of the story. And during a time when activism is on the rise, it's important to approach our actions with empathy and an open mind. Because if there's one thing I've always been told about human beings, it's that we're really good at adapting and changing. We all carry the spirit of the shapeshifter inside of us. So we all have to recognize that each person, no matter who they are or what they believe, is deserving of an equal place in our society. Because we're all capable of the same potential to do what's right and to do what's wrong. So I ask you all to choose to be empathetic. Thank you. Okay, I have a long list of thank yous, and if I don't say thank you to you, I'm so sorry. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank God because he had to deal with all of my 3 a.m. breakdown prayers of, I can't do this, and he decided to give me the strength to do this anyway, so thank you. And thank you to my lovely mother for giving birth to me and for supporting me every day since. I don't know who I would be without you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Miss Wellington, who is practically my mom at school. Thank you for your 4 years of support and love. And for this project, thank you for letting me ramble to you for hours about things that I know you don't really understand. But thank you for that anyway. Thank you to Ms. Huckabee for editing my paper and helping me find the words for things that I couldn't really formulate myself. Thank you to Laura McGrew for speaking with me and giving me her input and insight. Shout out to Hannah for watching. You could have been doing anything else, but you decided to do this, and I appreciate you, and your cosplays are a creative inspiration, and you're a role model for me. And last but not least, thank you all for joining and watching me here. I hope you enjoyed something that I said. Thank you.
Questions from the floor? Annalise.
Do you prefer Marvel movie Loki or comic book Loki?
The question was, do I prefer Marvel movie Loki or comic Loki? I prefer comics Loki just because I think the MCU has a bit of a representation problem in that not only in general do they just whitewash, but they also just fail to acknowledge that Loki is a queer character. And I think that's just important to just Loki's identity. And also the fact that they mentioned Loki's Jotun heritage one time and never did it again, even though it plays a big role in who Loki is and what drives their actions. So yes, the comics. Oh, is there one up there? Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see you with the lights. Ooh, okay. So how did I get into comics? And if I remember, I guess, the first comic that I read. So before I got into comics, I really liked, like I said, I like superhero stuff. My dad used to watch a lot of like DC and Marvel cartoons when I was younger, so that was what was always on. And that's how I just got really interested. So I think I just saw the shows and the movies first, and then I was like, wait, there's source material that goes behind all this. And I don't really remember the first comic that I read, but I found that there's like a whole new different world in the comic books, and I'm always one to go straight to the source material, so I wanted to know what that world was like, and I've been fascinated ever since. And I still have barely scratched the surface because there's so much out there. Ooh, okay. So if I could adapt any comic book run into a movie or maybe a show, who would I cast as Loki? And what was the other question? And which run would I adapt? I would adapt Agent of Asgard. That's my favorite. I think that's just a brilliant comic. This is kind of a selfish answer, but I would cast myself. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know anyone else. I think anyone who knows and loves Loki would be great at the job, but I personally would like a shot at the character.
Hello. Hi, Elizabeth. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We have many comments, but one burning question from a fifth grader. What do you like best about Loki?
Ooh, I think Loki's quick wit. If there's something I've always admired about characters in general, it's if they're able to get out of a situation without resorting to violence. And I mean, Loki's done a lot of questionable things, but I really admire their ability to get out of a situation with the power of language and words, because as someone who I could speak a lot better and more eloquently in general. I just admire when people are able to just use their words as a weapon, and I think that's very cool. Also, Loki just uses a lot of humor to cope, and that's something that I relate to a lot.
I have a few more now.
Okay.
What is your favorite incarnation of Loki in the comics from 8th grade?
Okay, I know I talk about Agent of Asgard a lot. So outside of Agent of Asgard, I think I really like Lady Loki. It could just be that I'm a young woman, and I think that she's very admirable in terms of the way that she can carry herself with elegance and confidence and just get what she wants, again, with the use of language. And I just think that that's very cool and a skill that I would like to have.
Elizabeth. Do you have any other favorite canonically queer characters in entertainment?
Like in entertainment in general.
Just all of
Oh, I know I do, and this is really sad that none of them are coming to mind. And I think that's just because there's not a lot of them. I think right now, just because I'm on like a Marvel kick, Nico from Runaways is a lesbian character and very cool, crafty witch. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question, and I know I have a better answer, but I cannot think of a character.
I have one more so far before they
Yes.
start. What are you hoping to see in the Loki series?
Ooh. I'm hoping to see better representation. Other than representation, I really hope that they develop Loki as a character who is still suffering from trauma. So the Loki series follows Loki after the first Avengers movie, and it is confirmed that Loki's actions during that movie were a result from mind control by Thanos. So Loki was not in control of his actions, and he was tortured to get there. And they never just acknowledged that Loki, not only did Loki get into that position because he was already emotionally vulnerable in the first place, and Thanos took advantage of that, but then afterwards just to have to cope with all of that suffering and physical pain on your own because you don't feel like anyone loves you or cares for you enough to help you, I think is something that the Loki series should touch on a bit more, and just to see Loki learn to cope and hopefully make a friend or have a found family, I think is just something that a lot of people should see, because there's a lot of people out there who unfortunately don't have a support system and are going through just a lot of trauma. So to see someone that they relate to find that and find some hope, I think will give them hope as well. Sophie? Like if I could have a trio? Okay, so if I was fighting a villain and I could have two people on my team and one of them has to be or some incarnation of Loki, I would pick I think I would pick either like classic Loki or Agent of Asgard Loki, just because magic. But I think Agent of Asgard Loki I would get along with more. And the second character would have to be, okay, and I have to prioritize the fact that I'm not a very strong person. So I think having Bucky or Captain America would, I need that bronze, because Loki and I are not physically strong people, so I need someone to be the muscles on my team.
Yeah, one more. Do you have any aspirations to work in the comic industry?
Ooh, not in the comic industry. I don't think I have the strengths in either like drawing or writing something, but I would like to, in the acting industry, be in a Marvel movie or show, just because I like that side of things. And I do think they need some input as to how to better represent some characters in the comics. So I would like my voice to be there.
That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth.